Jasmine Crockett teaches Greene directly. Greene's stubborn stupidity makes her pay again. The hearing room crackled with restless energy. Mahogany desks, brass nameplates, 100 murmurs bouncing off marble walls. At the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett sitting sharp, unblinking. Ready. The chair's gavel slammed once sharp as a gunshot. We now recognize Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene for her remarks. A shuffle, a cough, and then chaos dressed in a Georgia drawl. Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned into the microphone with a fervor only ignorance could fuel. We cannot let these damn scientists block out the sun. The words hung absurd and molten. She waved a printout wildly, a screenshot from a sensationalist article, her voice rising with each syllable. Bill Gates and his climate lunatics want to cut off our life-giving sun, the very source of life itself. Murmurs rippled through the room. An aide stifled a cough that might have been a laugh. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. Her eyes were steady, patient, coiled. Greene barreled forward, fueled by some toxic cocktail of misunderstanding and rage. They're going to spray chemicals in the atmosphere, thousands of planes, creating chemical clouds to block sunlight. Gasps not from shock, but from secondhand embarrassment. A few members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jasmine steepled her fingers under her chin, watching, letting Greene dig her own grave. Greene ranted about volcanoes, about global darkness, about the end of crops and freedom. She invoked Jewish space lasers. She weaved Bill Gates into a tapestry of conspiracies so absurd it would make Alex Jones blush. Her voice rose to a fever-pitch, veins taut at her temples. We need access to the sun. It's basic human rights. Across the room, staffers furiously typed notes, eyes wide. Somewhere, a C-SPAN producer whispered, "Oh my God," under his breath. Jasmine Crockett inhaled once. Slow, measured, then finally her turn. The chair gave a weary nod. Representative Crockett, you have the floor. Jasmine leaned forward into the mic voice, low but sharp as a scalpel. Thank you, Mr. Chair. She stacked her notes deliberately like loading bullets into a chamber. And then calmly, let's start with the basics. A pause. No one is trying to block out the sun. Another pause, letting the weight of reason settle against the madness that preceded it. Jasmine outlined the facts with surgical precision. The Project Greene referenced a theoretical study, decades in discussion. Solar geoengineering meant to reflect a tiny percentage of sunlight, roughly 2%. The method, stratospheric aerosol injection, involving sea salt particles, not deadly chemicals. We're talking about scientific experiments, Jasmine said, voice even. Limited trials, monitored by global institutions. She leaned back slightly. Not volcanoes, not darkening the planet, not whatever fever dream we just heard. A soft ripple of restrained chuckles moved through the chamber. Jasmine pivoted to the heart of the issue. You can disagree with geoengineering. You can debate its risks. But what you cannot do, what you must not do, is weaponize misinformation against the public. She tapped the microphone gently, the sound crisp and final. Because spreading fear based on lies doesn't protect freedom. It undermines it. The room shifted, an invisible axis turning. The battle was no longer between left and right. It was between reality and madness. Greene tried to interject a sputtering, incoherent interruption, but Jasmine Crockett raised a single hand without looking at her. The chair backed her with a stern glance. The representative has the floor, he recalled coldly. Greene fumed, biting her tongue hard enough that it might have drawn blood. Jasmine continued steady, relentless. She cited peer-reviewed studies, quoted climate scientists, explained the delicate nuances of weather patterns, the risks of interfering, the importance of methodical trials. Not Twitter rants, not memes, actuarial science. This isn't a sci-fi novel, Jasmine said quietly. This is our future. And if we're too busy screaming at the sun, we'll miss the chance to save it. A hush rippled through the chamber. No snickers now, no whispers. Only the sharp living tension of a room realizing it had been handed a mirror. Finally, Jasmine closed her folder and looked straight at Greene. Not with rage, not with mockery, with something colder. Pity. Ignorance is loud, she said, but the truth doesn't need to be shouted. Silence. Total. Complete. A silence that roared louder than any speech. The chair cleared his throat awkwardly. Thank you, Representative Crockett. He banged the gavel once almost reverently. Greene sat rigid, eyes burning with a frustration she couldn't voice without sinking deeper. And Jasmine. She simply smiled, not a grin of victory, but of resolve. Because this was never about winning an argument. It was about defending reality itself. The echo of Jasmine Crockett's closing words hadn't even faded when the first shockwaves hit. Outside the Capitol, under the cold steel skies of Washington, D.C., reporters surged forward like a tide. Their cameras blinked alive, their microphones thrust into the air, their voices layered into a symphony of chaos. Representative Crockett, do you stand by calling Representative Greene's comments dangerous? Jasmine, do you believe Marjorie Taylor Greene should be censured for misinformation? Jasmine didn't rush. She stood tall, her posture clean and unshaken. A storm had begun, and she intended to walk through it, not run from it. Inside the building, Greene fumed privately, stalking the corridors like a lioness deprived of a kill. Her aides whispered frantically around her, their faces pale, their phones buzzing with headlines. Crockett schools, Greene over climate conspiracies. Science versus screaming, Crockett delivers brutal reality check. Twitter trended within minutes. Crockett crush, sun not under attack. Science wins memes, exploded side-by-side screenshots of Greene's rants and Jasmine's unbothered expressions. One meme showed Jasmine calmly sipping coffee under the caption, "Meanwhile on Earth." Greene's anger boiled over. This isn't over, she hissed at her chief of staff, but already she was losing control of the narrative. Cable news picked up the thread like a pack of bloodhounds. CNN, MSNBC, even some cautious commentators on more conservative outlets, they couldn't ignore it. The clips were simply too powerful. Jasmine's calm, relentless dismantling of Greene's hysteria was cinematic perfection, a real-time autopsy of ignorance. One commentator on PBS said it best, in an age of performative outrage, Crockett reminded the country what leadership actually looks like, facts over fear. The hearing had ended hours ago, but the fight for the public's mind had only just begun. That night, Jasmine Crockett returned to her modest D.C. apartment. She peeled off her blazer, kicked off her heels, and collapsed onto the worn couch. The adrenaline still buzzed in her blood. Her phone chimed, and chimed again, and again. Hundreds of notifications, text messages from colleagues. Proud of you, sis. You gave them hell. Thank you for speaking for all of us who've had to bite our tongues. Emails from scientists, from teachers, from exhausted parents. From people who didn't have the platform she did, but had long suffered the consequences of lies dressed as patriotism. She let the messages wash over her. Gratitude, anger, a burden heavier than applause. Because truth carries weight. And now it was hers to carry. The following morning, Jasmine faced her first major interview. The CBS studio lights were blinding. The host wore a neutral expression, polished, careful. Congresswoman Crockett, some of your critics say your comments were disrespectful to Representative Greene's right to express concern. How do you respond? Jasmine leaned slightly forward, her voice steady. Free speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences. A pause. A razor-thin smile. And when you mislead millions about science, especially when the stakes are the survival of our planet, you bet there will be consequences. The host blinked. The producers in the control room exchanged quick, impressed glances. This wasn't the usual hedging, the usual political dance. This was a woman wielding facts like a sword. As the day unfolded, Greene's allies scrambled. Tucker Carlson aired a furious monologue claiming Crockett was bullying freedom-loving Americans. Newsmax ranted about the left's war on skepticism. Greene herself posted a 5-minute unhinged Facebook video in which she railed against Bill Gates and his satanic plots, globalist weather control, and something about God's light being stolen. It barely made a ripple, because for every echo chamber that swallowed Greene's claims, 10 more Americans had seen the hearing for themselves, had seen her shriek, had seen Jasmine stand like bedrock against the flood. In the Capitol, Jasmine prepared for round 2, a joint press conference with several moderate Republicans who had quietly reached out overnight. Men and women are tired of being associated with delusion, tired of seeing their party hijacked by carnival barkers. It was unprecedented. It was fragile. But it was real. They stood together in front of the cameras, awkward but determined. One Republican senator cleared his throat and said, "I may not agree with Representative Crockett on everything, but today I stand with science." The flashbulbs exploded. History, messy, imperfect history, clicked into motion. That night, Fox News tried a different tactic. They played heavily edited clips. They framed Jasmine as disrespectful, arrogant, elitist. It didn't stick, because authenticity once seen couldn't be unseen. Millions had watched the full confrontation, had seen the rage, the desperation, the intellectual emptiness behind Greene's theatrics, and had seen Jasmine Crockett not as some manufactured media darling, but as a woman who understood the stakes of this broken moment and chose not to break with it. Meanwhile, in Greene's world, cracks deepened. A growing number of GOP donors expressed frustration behind closed doors. Polls showed her favorability dropping among independents. Her fundraising emails grew shriller, more apocalyptic. They want to silence me. They want to block the sun. Even among her base, the message began to feel tired, old, and the cruelty of conspiracy. The rot at its heart began to stink too strongly to ignore. In a small town in Ohio, a middle school science teacher played Jasmine's hearing clip for her students. They watched wide-eyed as truth battled hysteria. When it ended, a boy in the back raised his hand. "Why did that lady get so mad about science?" The teacher smiled sadly. "Because sometimes," she said, "when people don't understand something, they're afraid of it." Another hand shot up. "But she just made stuff up." The teacher nodded. And that's why it's brave to tell the truth, even when people don't want to hear it. The class sat quietly after that, maybe learning something deeper than any textbook could offer. In D.C., Jasmine Crockett sat in a late-night strategy meeting with her staff. On a whiteboard, they mapped out next steps: introduce a resolution affirming support for science and policymaking, propose bipartisan hearings on climate literacy, launch a public education campaign to combat conspiracy theories. She looked around the table. Young aides, seasoned advisors, exhausted faces lit by stubborn hope. She tapped the marker against the board. "This isn't about dunking on Greene," she said. "It's about reclaiming the ground we lost to fear." A pause. "It's about reminding America what leadership actually means." Heads nodded, spines straightened. The fight would be brutal, but it was a fight worth having. As midnight approached, Jasmine finally left the Capitol. She walked the steps slowly, the city buzzing softly around her. She thought of the sun, not as a symbol hijacked by conspiracy theories, but as it truly was. A fierce, stubborn light burning through chaos. And tomorrow she will rise with it. Not because the fight was easy, but because it mattered. Because the truth deserved defenders who wouldn't flinch when the storm broke loose. And because she knew deep in her bones the sun would keep rising. And so would she. The morning after the storm, Washington awoke to a new reality. Coffee shops buzzed with whispers. Taxi radios replayed Jasmine Crockett's voice over and over. Even the polished anchors on morning news shows struggled to hide their awe. A freshman congresswoman, now a national figure overnight, one commentator marveled. And she didn't scream. She didn't stand up. She just told the truth. In a city addicted to noise, Jasmine's quiet defiance had detonated louder than any tantrum. Jasmine didn't savor the moment. She had no time for it. Instead, she buried herself in work meeting with climate scientists, local educators, and civil rights groups. If the old guard saw facts as negotiable, she would make them inescapable. At a crowded town hall in Baltimore, she stood before a restless audience. Mothers holding babies, steelworkers with grease-stained hands, teenagers who had never seen a leader speak to them, not down at them. Jasmine's voice cut through the noise like a tuning fork. "They want you afraid of the future," she said. "But fear is a liar. Knowledge isn't." Applause thundered, not polite hungry. Meanwhile, Marjorie Taylor Greene seethed in increasingly erratic videos. She warned of darkness descending, of elites trying to block the heavens, of liberal death clouds. Her allies echoed her panic. But something was different now. Their words fell heavier, lazier, more desperate. The country had seen the contrast, clarity versus chaos, and a deep silent shift had begun. Even some who once rolled their eyes at politics started tuning back in, drawn by something rare, hope. The next flashpoint came sooner than anyone expected. A coalition of Democratic and moderate Republican representatives, quietly encouraged by Jasmine's momentum, introduced the Truth in Science Public Policy Act. It was modest by design, require scientific advisors for climate-related legislation, fund public education on basic climate facts, penalize willful dissemination of provable scientific falsehoods by federal officials. Small steps, but seismic ones. The backlash was immediate. Far-right networks howled about thought police and science overlords. Greene posted an all-caps rant warning of Bill Gates taking your sky. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so deadly serious. Jasmine stood firm. In a CNN interview, when asked about Greene's accusations, she didn't even blink. "You can't fix a broken bone by pretending it isn't broken," she said calmly. "And you can't save a nation by pretending facts are optional." The clip went viral again, not because it was fiery, because it was clean, sharp, undeniable. Reality once more asserting itself. Late that evening, as Jasmine sat in her office, her chief of staff burst through the door, barely able to contain himself. "We've got it," he grinned. "We have the votes to get it to the floor." Jasmine closed her laptop slowly. 1,000 battles still ahead. But tonight, a victory. Small, but real. She allowed herself one moment, one breath, a promise to herself, and to the country still learning how to hope again. This is only the beginning. Victory never goes unpunished in Washington. By sunrise, the backlash had sharpened into a blade. Fox News unleashed a full segment branding Jasmine Crockett a science tyrant. Twitter boiled over with hashtags like Shady Crockett censorship and Shady freedom, not facts. Fundraising emails screamed into inboxes across Red America. They want to control your weather. Fight back now. Even some Democrats, older, grayer, wrung their hands in private. "She's moving too fast," they whispered in the hallways. "She's stirring the wrong hornet's nest." Jasmine Crockett heard every word and stayed the course. The House floor debate on the Truth in Science Public Policy Act was set for Friday, but the war started long before that. Marjorie Taylor Greene led the charge not with facts, but with spectacle. She organized a Sunlight Freedom rally outside the Capitol, complete with giant cardboard suns, conspiracy theorists, and Stop the Sky thieves. T-shirts, and a truck blaring Alex Jones rants on loop. Reporters swarmed the circus. Greene bellowed into megaphones about globalist plots and God's gift being stolen by socialist elites. It was a theater of the absurd, but absurdity had teeth, and it bit deep. Threats against Jasmine skyrocketed. Anonymous calls to her office breathing promises of violence. Emails soaked in hatred. Even death threats scrawled in shaky handwriting mailed to her home district. Her staff, once buoyant with purpose, now operated in tight, tense clusters, eyes always watching the doors. The Capitol Police increased her security detail. Every day felt heavier, every step tighter. Still, Jasmine Crockett pressed on. Behind the scenes, Greene lobbied hard to kill the bill. She whipped votes. She dangled threats against moderates. She promised revenge at the polls to anyone who sided with science tyrants. Cable news fed the flames. Pundits smeared Jasmine as arrogant, true radical, out of touch. One anchor sneered, "She's young, she's new. She doesn't understand that Washington eats idealists alive." Maybe, but Jasmine had no illusions. She hadn't come to Washington to survive it. She had come to change it. Thursday night, the eve of the vote, Jasmine gathered her team in a dim conference room. The walls were thin. The coffee was burnt. The fatigue hung so heavy, it might as well have been another member in the room. Jasmine stood before them, notes abandoned voice, low and burning. "They're betting on exhaustion," she said. "They think if they scream loud enough, lie long enough, threaten hard enough, we'll back down." Her eyes swept the room steady. "They don't understand something basic." She smiled, not wide, but fierce. "We aren't here because it's easy. We're here because it's necessary." Silence, then nods, tightened jaws, fists curled with new fire. The final plan laid itself out simple and brutal. Survive the storm, deliver the vote, tell the truth. That night, Jasmine sat alone in her office watching the city blink outside her window. The monuments glowed in the distance, cold and eternal. She thought of the ones who had come before her, the ones who had marched until their feet bled, spoken until their throats tore, fought until history bent, however slightly, toward justice. Their blood still ran under this marble. Their voices still echoed down these halls. And now it was her turn to lift it higher. Friday. The day broke gray and tense. Security swarmed the Capitol steps. Protesters screamed from barricades. Inside, the House chamber buzzed like a hive under siege. Jasmine Crockett took her seat, her hands steady, her heart pounding. Greene glared at her across the aisle, a mask of righteous fury barely stretched over raw desperation. The gavel struck. The debate began. Jasmine rose to speak. The room tilted toward her. Thousands watched on screens. Millions held their breath. She spoke not with fire, but with ice. Sharp, clear, cutting. Science is not a weapon. It is not a conspiracy. It is not the enemy. She named the stakes plainly, brutally. Rising seas, swallowing cities. Crops failing. Storms growing sharper, hungrier. And still, she said, voice hardening, there are those who would rather argue with the sun itself than face reality. The chamber rippled. Greene heckled from her seat. "Fearmonger." Jasmine didn't flinch. "No, Representative Greene," she said softly. "I fear ignorance far more than the future." The clock ticked. The speeches raged. The lies flowed like bile. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett stood unbowed. The vote drew near. Greene prowled the floor, whispering venom into wavering ears. Jasmine moved differently, not begging, not bullying, but reminding. Of duty. Of country. Of the children who would inherit whatever choices were made today. "We can kneel to fear," she told one wavering moderate. "Or we can stand with the truth." He met her gaze, and nodded. One more vote. One more crack of light. The final tally neared. The speaker called the roll. Names echoed like drum beats. Jasmine gripped the edge of her desk. The air felt too thick to breathe. The final numbers flashed onto the giant board. Yes, 218. No duet. The chamber erupted, some in cheers, others in howls of outrage. The gavel banged down. The motion is passed. The Truth in Science Public Policy Act, battered, bloodied, but alive, had survived. Jasmine closed her eyes for half a second. Not in exhaustion. In gratitude. Victory is never silent in Washington. By dawn, the backlash exploded. Screens flooded with fury. Talk radio howled with rage. Opinion pieces sharpened knives. The same voices that had once mocked Jasmine Crockett now spat venom. Authoritarianism, thought control, big government takeover. Greene led the charge naturally. Standing on the Capitol steps flanked by loyalists waving signs about saving the sun, she declared, "Today, they stole your freedom in the name of fake science." The crowd roared. Chants of shame. Shame rattled the marble pillars. It wasn't just noise. It was a warning. The war had entered a new, uglier phase. Inside her office, Jasmine Crockett watched the footage without blinking. Her staff shifted uneasily around her. They knew what came next. Threats would escalate. Lies would multiply. Pressure from every direction, donors, media, even so-called allies, would mount. Still, Jasmine's voice was calm when she spoke. If they're screaming this loud, she said, it means they felt the punch. A tired chuckle from her chief of staff, but no one really laughed. The weight was real now, not political, personal. Social media burned hot. Some praised her as a truth-teller, a rare flame of sanity in a storm of madness. Others, whipped into frenzy by Greene's propaganda, branded her a tyrant. Death threats poured into her inbox. Dozens, then hundreds, some detailed, some chillingly casual. The Capitol Police upgraded her threat level again. Security briefings consumed hours of her day. Her schedule shrank. Her movements grew guarded. She hated it. But she adapted, because retreat was not an option. Meanwhile, Greene's machinery kept churning. She announced plans for a Save the Sun tour, a series of rallies across battleground states. Fox News gave her primetime slots. Far-right influencers amplified every word. Even some moderate Republicans, spooked by Greene's base, began murmuring doubts about the Science Policy Act. Maybe it went too far, they whispered. Maybe the timing was wrong. Cowardice cloaked as strategy. Jasmine knew the signs. Truth had won the day, but lies were regrouping for a siege. In the House chamber, Greene filed a motion to repeal the act. Symbolic. Doomed to fail. But symbols mattered. Optics mattered. And Greene understood theater better than most. Her repeal effort wasn't about winning. It was about bleeding Jasmine Crockett, drip by drip in public, forcing her to defend again, and again, and again, until fatigue cracked even the strongest armor. Jasmine met the moment head on. She spoke calmly at every hearing, corrected misinformation ruthlessly, remained visible, accessible, even when advisors begged her to lay low. If I disappear, she said, they fill the space with lies. Town halls, podcasts, community centers. She showed up, not in polished sound bites, in full, in flaws and fury and humanity. It mattered. Not to everyone, but to enough. One night alone in her apartment, Jasmine scrolled through messages she normally ignored. Hate, mostly. Threats. But tucked between the bile, a different kind of letter. A science teacher in Oklahoma. A woman who had never been political. Writing to say that after the hearing, she felt hope again. You reminded my students that the truth still matters? The letter read. You reminded me. Jasmine blinked hard, closed her laptop, sat in silence. Let the weight settle. The hate was louder. But this was why the fight mattered. Meanwhile, behind Greene's noise, cracks began to spiderweb. A growing number of conservatives quietly admitted they were tired. Tired of chasing conspiracy theories. Tired of screaming into cameras. Tired of losing ground to extremism. Polls shifted. Not dramatically, but measurably. The Science Policy Act, once controversial, began polling at 58% support among independents. Among young voters, 72%. Truth was a slow fighter, but it landed body blows that lies could not. The final blow came from an unexpected place. A leaked recording, Greene in a closed-door fundraiser, admitting the entire Save the Sun campaign was a great way to fire up the rubes. The backlash was immediate. Editorials blistered. Moderates recoiled. Even some loyalists wavered. Jasmine Crockett said nothing. She didn't gloat, didn't tweet. She simply kept working. As the storm devoured its architects, the storm passed, and Jasmine Crockett was still standing. Not untouched, not unscarred, but upright and undeniable. The leaked Greene tape ricocheted across the country like a thunderclap. Editorials reversed course. Moderate Republicans scrambled to distance themselves. And Jasmine, she didn't waste a second. Her first move was simple, elegant, devastating. A national campaign? Project Dawn. It wasn't about politics, not officially. It was about truth. Education? community. The slogan was sharp enough to cut steel. The future belongs to the informed. Billboards bloomed across battleground states. Workshops launched in libraries, churches, union halls. Science fairs funded in rural counties. Everywhere, Greene and her acolytes had sowed fear. Jasmine planted facts, not speeches, conversations, not shouting, listening, a movement, not a moment. The backlash sputtered. Greene tried to pivot. She screeched about government brainwashing, about science cults. But the damage was done. The leaked tape had exposed the game, and now every shriek sounded hollow. Jasmine didn't engage directly. She didn't need to. Reality itself was doing the heavy lifting now, and reality had finally found a voice that wouldn't flinch. Momentum gathered like a storm. Young voters who had tuned out in cynicism tuned back in with fury. Science teachers long mocked and underfunded found new backing, new allies. Jasmine's town halls overflowed. Not just in cities, but in farm towns, mining villages, coastal outposts. Everywhere that the sun shone and lies had tried to darken. One teenager in Iowa summed it up best. She talked to us like we weren't stupid. And for once, someone believed we could handle the truth. National media couldn't keep up. Headlines stumbled over themselves. The Crockett effect. Sunlight politics. Truth rising. Late-night shows joked that Marjorie Greene had accidentally created the most effective public science campaign in a generation. It wasn't entirely wrong. Sometimes the lie digs its own grave. Sometimes the monster creates its own hunter. In Washington, Greene fumed. Her rallies shrank. Her donors dried up. She remained defiant, louder, angrier, but increasingly isolated. A cautionary tale in real time. One evening, Jasmine passed her in a Capitol hallway. For one fleeting second, their eyes locked. No words, no gestures. Just two truths colliding in a silent war. Neither could deny, one built on rage, the other on resolve. Only one would endure. Jasmine Crockett's final masterstroke was quiet, almost gentle. A televised address, not a campaign speech, not a fundraising plea, a national conversation. Broadcast live from a public high school auditorium. Simple stage? No banners. Just a circle of students, teachers, farmers, doctors. Faces ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Jasmine stood in their center. No teleprompter, no script. Only truth. She spoke of fear, of confusion, of how lies preyed on fatigue, but also of hope, of the stubborn, shining resilience that refused to be dimmed. They told you the sun was being stolen, Jasmine said. They lied. A pause. The room held its breath. Not because the truth is dangerous, but because it is powerful. She pointed at the faces around her, at all of America watching. You are powerful. A silence so pure it felt sacred. No applause, no chants. Just understanding. In the months that followed, Project Dawn spread. Jasmine Crockett's approval ratings soared. More importantly, so did trust in science among young Americans. Climate literacy rates climbed. Public belief in basic facts, long eroded, began a fragile, trembling recovery. It would not be easy. It would not be fast. But the seeds were planted. And Jasmine, battered, defiant, luminous, stood ready to fight for every inch. One evening, back in her apartment, Jasmine watched the sun set over DC gold bleeding into purple. The city sprawling and imperfect and stubborn beneath it. She smiled. Not because the war was over. It never would be. But because somewhere in 1,000 classrooms, 1,000 living rooms, the future was stirring. Not in fear. In light. In truth. The sun had never been stolen. It had only been waiting for someone willing to fight for it.